Well, good morning. If you would take out your New Testament and turn to John chapter 12. Passage in John 12, starting in verse 20. And then we're going to back up a little bit to put it in context, and then we're going to complete the lesson by looking at something Peter wrote. In John 12 and in verse 20, we see, now there were some Greeks among those who were going up to worship at the feast. These came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and began to ask him, saying, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip came and told Andrew, and Andrew and Philip came and told Jesus. Have you ever gotten an interview or an audience with someone famous these days? Probably the way you're going to have to go about it. Oh, I realize some people like Stephen King go wandering around Bangor, Maine, going to Saturday morning, go get his groceries or whatever, and he'll stop and talk to whoever's there, visitors. But generally speaking, if you're wanting to get in touch with someone famous, you've got to go through their people. You got to get a hold of their management company or their scheduling secretary or whatever in order to be able to get to them. And that's exactly what these guys were doing. They had seen Jesus. I mean, if you go back up to verse 12, a large crowd had gathered that had come from the feast, and that's when they had the palm branches out to meet him and saying, "Hosanna." So putting the eyes on Jesus wasn't what they were looking for. They were looking for an audience with him. They wanted to talk to him. And they went about it in the first century the same way we would go about it today. You go through someone else to try to get to him. I'm not sure. Jesus answered them. I don't know if the them is Andrew and Philip or if the them are the Greeks. I tend to think the latter. I think they got their audience because of things that were said. But why would they have wanted to see Jesus? Well, again, we're not told. So what I'm about to tell you is in the area of speculation, and you just take it for that. The reason I think they wanted to talk to Jesus was because they were going to offer him safety. Get out of here. We've got a place you can go. Let me tell you why. Let's back up. Go back to chapter 10 just for a moment. We're just going to look at a few verses back there. In chapter 10, in verse 24, the Jews gathered around him and were saying to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you're the Christ, tell us plainly." And Jesus said, "I told you, and you did not believe." And he goes on and explains some things to them. In verse 31, their reaction was they picked up stones in order to stone him. And Jesus said, "Now, what good work was it I did that you're about to throw rocks at me for?" And the dialogue continued. You get to verse 39. They were seeking again to seize him, and he eluded their grasp. You get in chapter 11, after Lazarus has been raised, in verse 45 of chapter 11, many of the Jews who had come to Mary and saw what he had done believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them the things Jesus had done. You're not going to believe what this Jesus did. He got a guy out of the tomb who had been there for 4 days. His sister was afraid he was going to smell bad, and you're not going to believe this. And their reaction, of course, was to be in awe and fall down to go study at his... No, wait a minute, that wasn't what they did. In verse 47, they convened a council and says, "What are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away our place, both our place and our nation." And one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all. Do you not take into account it's expedient for you that one man die for the people, and that the whole nation not perish?" He said, look, it's almost like King Farquaad in Shrek. It's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. I'm willing to sacrifice the life of one man for our entire nation. Of course, that one man's not going to be me, but I'm willing to make that sacrifice. And later, he was willing to double it. Turn to chapter 12. I say one, I meant two. We'll take out 2 people to save the nation. So we know that their plot was known to others. We know that if we go up to, back to chapter 11, and in verse 16, when Jesus gets word that was ill, and then he said, Lazarus is dead, in verse 14. He said, I'm glad you were here, so that when you see what you see, you'll believe. In verse 16, Thomas said to his fellow disciples, let us go also, so that we may die with him. The idea that by the Pharisees was not a secret. So therefore, when we get back to 12:20, I don't have a problem with a speculation, and again, that's all it is, that what the Greeks were saying is, you can come stay with us. We can get you out of here, because these people here are going to kill you. Now read what Jesus said starting in verse 23, which again I think ties into that. He said, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. He who loves his life loses it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep life eternal. If anyone serves me, he must follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone, the Father will honor him. And I wanted us to think this morning about that phrase. I asked Charlie to lead this song. He must follow me. And the phrase, we wish to see Jesus. You want to see Jesus? Well, yeah, but there's a step you got to take first these days to see the actual Christ. But you can see Jesus today in your fellow Christians, in the way they behave, the way they think, the way they talk. We're going to be looking at talking here in just a moment. No, we're not seeing the actual Messiah that died on the cross for us. But if we are living like we should be, people can see Jesus in us, not quite to the extent the Greeks were able to in their day and time. We're going to finish in 1 Peter 2. Starting in verse 21, his steps, who committed no sin, nor was any deceit found in his mouth. And while being reviled, he did not revile in return. While suffering, he uttered no threats, but kept entrusting himself to the one who judges righteously. I know that's not the end of the sentence, but let's stop there, because there's three qualities of using your mouth that are listed here for us that we who profess to be Christians need to have in our lives. The first one is in verse 22. It says, he committed no sin. Well, sorry, I've already fouled up on that one. But the New American Standard says, nor was any deceit found in his mouth. I think the Old King James uses the word guile there, maybe even the New King James. So the first thing he says here, no any deceit in your mouth. You ever try to fool someone into thinking you're more righteous than you are? Because people, but actually be righteous as Christ when we can. And also, there's another person we don't need to deceive, and that's ourselves. We don't need to be lying to ourselves about how good we're doing. Don't do any of that comparative review. Well, I may not be the best member here at Northside, but I'm better than, and then insert whoever you think the worst one is. You shouldn't be doing that in the first place. But have no deceit in your mouth, and sometimes it may get all the way to the point of being reviled. When that happens, don't repay unkindness with unkindness. Remember how Jesus dealt with Satan? That suffering in context, I think we've got to go back to verse 19. It says, for this finds faith, for the sake of conscience toward God, a person bears up under sorrows when suffering unjustly. In other words, you're being accused of something you didn't do. You're being persecuted. I'm trying to think of another good word for it. You're suffering because of the cause of Christ. And it's not just. So what do? You don't utter threats. It's very easy at times to say, yeah, you're making my life hard, but let me tell you, I can make things hard on you. And I'm a guy who used to could subpoena people. I could make life hard on people if I wanted to. But that's not our attitude. That was not Christ's attitude when he was going through, and I believe but that wasn't it. That wasn't all. We also saw in the previous two chapters, chapters 10 and 11 of John, how he was suffering unjustly. People were going to pick up rocks and throw them at him for telling them the truth. We need to be ready to suffer and suffer unjustly and don't respond with threats. We need to remember that vengeance belongs to the Lord and God will take care of it. We may never see it, but God will take care of wrongs that are done to us if the person does not repent of them. So, that's the lesson. Any thoughts, questions, or comments? We've got a few moments before we break for class. Any thoughts, questions, or comments? Oh, come on, I couldn't cover it.
Threats and or slanderous and libelous related communications to us will justify our response with righteous indignation.
Righteous indignation, exactly.
Be very careful about using that weapon around it and use that loosely, and that's not something we're. And you mentioned it, judgment's the Lord's.
Judgment's the Lord.
I've got to be very careful about my responses and characterizing them as well. This is just righteous.
Jesus. They may not know they want to. They may not know they need to. But we have to show them, to the extent we can, the qualities that Jesus had. And again, these are just three. I'm not even pretending that if you master these three, you've got it down, because this doesn't even touch on love. Love is the root of all of it, of course. But I just thought it was an interesting, in fact, the song that Charlie led, at the top of each of the songs you realize they've got verses. And this is the verse or the passage from 1 Peter chapter 2 that is referred to there. So the lesson just kind of fell together for me. Anything else? Well, if not, we've got a few moments to visit a little bit, and we'll be in our classes at 10. Thank you for your attention.